Welcome everybody to our very first Montessori Europe webinar. We have chosen this topic for tonight's presentation because we believe that this message of the Black voices has resonated with all of us, and it has reminded us of the importance of interdependence. Recent times have reminded us of our dependence on nature and on environment. It has also reminded us that our omnipotence as human beings will be challenged when we don't live together with nature and natural environment. But of course, it has also challenged one of us in our understanding how we support children and how we are creating new world for the children of tomorrow. And as we are challenging our own beliefs, the best way to do so is to listen to our colleagues who have experiences, and we need to listen carefully, not only to them, but also to the children with whom we work. And we need to be prepared to be challenged and to be brave to address uncomfortable questions. Before we hand over to our guests of today, I will ask Gwendolyn to please remind us of the ground rules.
Good evening, everyone. It's so lovely to see so many faces, many of them familiar and many also unfamiliar. So lovely to meet you all. The ground rules help us get through the webinar smoothly. Please, could you all keep your microphones on mute? This means that your background noise doesn't interfere with the speakers. If you would like to ask a question, then please, if you can see, there's a little icon at the bottom of your screen which says chat. Click on that and you can type your question into the chat box, and Barbara and I will pick them up and put them to the speakers. That's it. I hope you have a really lovely evening.
Thank you very much. And I will hand over to Stella Luis, who is a colleague of many years when we studied together with Stina Bruce. So over to you, Stella. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Good evening, everybody. I'm feeling really excited about talking to you about my experiences of race. But before I even start, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Dr. Stella Luis, and I work as an early years consultant, trainer, internationally. I do a lot of work in South Africa. I'm Froebelian trained. I write books about schemas. But one of the most important things I need to say to you is I'm a mother. I have one daughter, and I am one of 9 children. I have 6 sisters and 2 brothers, and we're all pretty much a year apart. Let's talk about race. I want to share an experience with you that happened to me when I was about 4 years old. I was in I think it was a nursery class, and we were making a dragon. There was big frame, a metal frame of a dragon, and we were encouraged to bring egg boxes in, so the egg boxes would become the dragon's skin. And because I'm from a large family, I bought a really large egg box in. And other people bought just like little boxes of 6 eggs. And as I was attempting to put my egg box on the dragon, this little girl called Samantha tried to take it away from me, and there was a bit of a tussle. And I won the tussle because it was mine. And she called me a nignog. Now, I didn't know what a nignog was, but I knew it wasn't nice. And I also knew it had something to do with my skin colour. And I recall going to the teacher. Remember, I'm about 4. I go to the teacher and I say, look, Samantha's just called me a nignog. And the teacher just looks at me and tells me to stop telling tales. And I think that had a really, really lasting impact on me. I think it had an impact on me for several reasons. A, I didn't know what a nignog was. And B, the teacher didn't challenge some, and you know, I think I would say in this session, it's a privilege to be taught about things like racism. It's something else to experience it. And I think, yeah, we need to think about our roles. My second experience of racism, I think, stems from when I had my first job in Southeast London. And the community that I was working in was a very white working class community. And I remember after a couple of years of being in this nursery school, a mum came in and said that, you know, she was going to take her daughter away. And the teacher was like, well, why? You know, this child is really happy. She's got lots of friends. And the mum was like, just have a look at those kids. What do you mean she's got friends? And the teacher looks around and doesn't really get what it is the mum's saying. And then the mum shouts out, are you colourblind? And the teacher was like, well, I give the children lots of love. I give them lots of attention. I don't see the problem. But I think what I want to say is for a long time in the 60s and the 70s, people were encouraged not to see race, particularly in England. It was thought that if you noticed someone's race, that meant you were racist. In fact, there was a whole movement called, you know, being colourblind. I think the reality is race is a social construct, and unfortunately, it often defines people's lived experiences. So the problem with the teacher not seeing the children's race is that she pretends that race doesn't exist. And to do that erases children's experiences. And I think that's a huge part of the problem. I think the final example that I have that I want to share was an experience I had in South Africa. And I know we've got some South African colleagues here. I was hoping to see you, Susanna, on my screen, but I can, hello. Yeah, this experience happened in South Africa. I've been working in South Africa for over a decade now, part of a project with Professor Tina Bruce. And most of our work up until that point had focused in Soweto. And we were working with Black staff and Black children in Soweto. However, I was then engaged in a piece of work in Cape Town. Now the setup in Cape Town is quite different. There is, the nursery I went to visit, there were Black and coloured children, but it was white and coloured staff working with these children. And whilst I was observing, I couldn't work out, this was the worst experience of my life, I need to add. I couldn't work out whether this teacher didn't like boys or she didn't like Black boys. Either way, whatever scenario I come to, neither one is good for children. And I observed the lesson, the children were bored, the Black boys in particular were humiliated. There was one kid that was sent to sit somewhere and she completely forgot about him for 45 minutes. And then she got the girls, once they'd done their activity, she's got the girls to run around the room, which they did. And then she noticed the little boy that was sat on the chair for 45 minutes. She then got him to join the boys and run around the room. And he fell over. And as he fell over, he hit his neck on the chair. And she just scolded him. Inside, my heart broke. I couldn't observe anymore. I felt the need to intervene. And I think what I want to say is, as adults, we sometimes forget the power we have to shape young children's learning. We can fill children's life with warmth, and we can fill it with wonder. We can help children to create worlds within our worlds, to develop, to explore and to learn. How beautiful and perfect a child appears to their parent, and how devastating it is when that perfect child feels like they don't belong in our setting. And I think I kind of just want to sort of stop there, just to pause to think about, you know, if we are colourblind, if we don't challenge other children when we hear and see them do things, we need to really think about what it is we may be doing to children's sense of worth and sense of self. And, you know, even if I go back to my first story, I really remember at home with my sisters, because all the books we had at school were images of white children and white families. We would put jumpers on our head. My favorite prop was the mop because it had hair and I could make it move. I think whatever we do, what we say and the resources that we have, we need to make sure they reflect the cultural heritage of the children that we're working with. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stella, for giving us a context of your experience. Ruth, would you like to unmute yourself and tell us your story? You are still on mute, Lovey.
Ruth, yeah, there you go.
Yes. Sorry, it has to be done by the host, so I couldn't unmute myself. Sorry about that. Hello, everyone. My name is Ruth. I am a Montessori practitioner. I trained with MCI, so Barbara used to be my tutor, and currently I'm doing an MA in early years education. I grew up back in East Africa, in Eritrea, and so all the experiences Stella has been, talking to us about regarding her personal experience, I really can't relate to them because where I grew up, everybody looked like me and everybody sounded like me. So, I'm very new to this thing. I have lived in the UK now for 8 years. So I am learning, even as a Black person, I am learning all this. Just to give you an example, it was quite recent, back in November 2019. I was, so this is the only experience actually I can actually say, I think it was a racial profiling thing. So what happened on my way was my colleagues, we were doing this sleep out, raising money for homeless young people. So I was on my way to that, place where we were going to do the sleeping out. There was so much space on the train, but there was this old man. He was an elderly man, a white man, who just didn't like my existence, basically. It was a very weird experience because there was so much space, there was no reason to be angry, and all of that, but he wouldn't stop staring at me and he wouldn't stop mumbling, and you can just, you can feel the hate towards me just by looking at him. But for me, it was a new experience. As I said, I can't relate to these experiences. So I really didn't understand why that man was behaving that way. However, there was, so basically he was sitting and there was another lady who was sitting in front of him, and I was actually standing next to her. I was far away from him. So this lady, a young white lady, she actually stood up for me and she started responding to him, and she was really angry, to be honest. And it was a very heated conversation, and he was saying, why are you even responding to me when I'm not talking to you? And she was like, yes, I know you're not talking to me, but I want you to talk loudly so we can all hear you and address it and all of that. It took me a while to really understand what was going on. Even with all of this going on, I was like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know why this man has this much hate towards me. And, this lady is standing up for me, but I honestly don't know what's going on here. So at some point, I really felt sorry for her. So, I said, you don't have to do this, just leave him alone. And I got off the train. So until I got off, I really didn't understand what was going on. But later on, obviously I was like, okay, maybe he didn't like me because I was Black and all that. and I went just my way. When I found my colleagues, that evening as we were sleeping out, so I was going to sleep out with my colleagues. All of the people who were going to do the sleeping out with me were white people. I was really angry, like I was really angry the whole evening. However, I refrained from sharing that with my colleagues because I thought that would be uncomfortable. I did share, however, with my friends on WhatsApp who happened to be Black because I really wanted to vent about it, but I never shared that with my colleagues. So, it is a learning process. And I think, some people who hasn't experienced, it could be white people, it could be Black people, or anyone who hasn't experienced, these things could relate to my experience. You could be a white person who is oblivious to what's going on in the world. I mean, not oblivious, but like not having a personal experience to these things, then you might relate to my experience. So I just want to share this with you, and just point out or highlight that this is a learning journey, and I'm learning, and I'm sure we all are learning together. And the other thing I want to mention was, so as I mentioned to you just now, I am studying at the moment. So during one of our classes, the module was on, not the module, but that session was on activism in early years. And as we were discussing this, the tutor wanted us to sit in groups so we can discuss activism in early years and what it means to children and all that. So as we were discussing, one of my colleagues, the classmates who were sitting in my group, said, she doesn't have children, but her a friend of hers has children, and her friend thinks that, she doesn't want her children to know about current affairs. She doesn't want them to know about what's going on in the world because she thinks it's too much for them, it's too painful. So she wants to shield them from everything that's going on. So my classmates shared this, and she said, I actually agree with her because if I had children, I would do the same thing. And I really had an issue with that. And I said, just having to decide whether you can share such things with your children or not shows that you are in a position of privilege. Because if you imagine a parent who lives in Syria, that mom doesn't have the option whether sharing this information with her child or not. If you think a parent living in Yemen, or any world that is in crisis, or in the midst of war, those parents don't have the option whether to share this information with their children or not, because it's a matter of death. These children need to know what's going on around them so they can protect themselves. It's just basically to keep your child alive. You need to give them all this information, whether it's bad or good. And I really think, I'm not saying, children need to know everything that's going on. I understand, content could be too much for children, but the news could be catered according to how can they understand. The news could be different for a 4-year-old, it could be different for a 7-year-old and a 12-year-old. But I don't think they should be shielded from all of this. And that way, it's I think it's Lynette and Siraj Blatchford who talk about seeding the environment. What you are seeding at this early age means a lot later on. And I really think we should share all of this, including any racial issues that we have, or everything that's going on in the world, bad or good. We need to share it with our children. We could be parents, we could be practitioners, but this needs to be shared. And one last point I would like to point out is, I'll give you an example on this one, because we all in our classrooms, as a Montessori practitioner, when I was working with my children, I always point out respect, and it's always, most of the time, one of our ground rules in our classrooms. And so what happened is, last year, as I was studying, it was the first day of the session, and our tutor, the lecturer, wanted to make ground rules. So everybody in the classroom were contributing towards the ground rules. So one person said, everybody was giving a ground rule, and this lady said, respecting everybody's opinion. And the lecturer had, so you see, respecting everybody's opinion, when you see it, it's really a good thing. And I don't think, normally anybody would disagree with that. But the lecturer had a problem with that. And she said, what am I going to do if your opinion is racist or sexist or whatever? How can I respect it? So, even with respect, as easy as that, yes, we respect the right, to an opinion of someone. Yes, we respect that, all of these things, but we don't necessarily need to respect their opinion if we don't agree with it. If it's a racist opinion, how can we agree with it? So, all of this we need to share with our children, instead of just saying we need to respect everyone and everything that comes out from everyone. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. And whilst you have been speaking, I have been reminded of the power of the white privilege. We don't really ever understand some of the experiences you have had, and the work of Simone Davies, which is familiar to many of you. In her recent blogs, she has interviewed Black mothers, and what struck me as a huge tragedy in today's world, the mother talked about the way how she was brought up, about the fact that she was cultured into being acceptable by the white community, so that she would not stand out too much. She would blend in, she would become invisible. And that relates to what Stella said, that each child needs to be seen, each child needs to be considered as an individual for who they are, not for whom we would like them to be or who would fit into the environment in which we are. And this perhaps will link with some of the thoughts that Hana may have about our position as white early years practitioners and the role we have in supporting children.
Great. Thank you. My name is Hana Bainham. I am a Montessori teacher educator at Montessori Center International. I've had a interesting upbringing. My mother is American and my father is English, but I was born and raised in India. So I believe that your experiences as a child definitely shape who you are. But I wanted to thank Stella and Ruth for really sharing your stories. And I think that this is the important time as a white ally. I think it's important to take the time to listen and to understand that we do not have shared experiences, even though we're all women. We have different experiences based on our skin color. I think it's time to listen, but it's also, like Ruth said, it's not time to ignore. We need to recognize that we need to discuss these things in our classroom. We need to be the person on the train who stands up to the racist old gentleman. We need to really think and do the work involved in that. I think as a Montessorian, I've been spending a lot of time doing the work and educating myself and thinking about how we represent difference in our environment, the importance of looking at the materials that we have in our environment, the books, even those teacher-created materials that we have in, for example, the culture envelopes or the continent envelopes. Are we perpetuating stereotypes? What kind of pictures are we including in that? What kind of discussions are we having with the children? Are we only highlighting Chinese New Year and highlighting some of the stereotypes like fortune cookies and things? What are we doing to really represent a culture? Are we actually bringing in the voices from that culture rather than pretending to be experts on that as well? I think we need to think about how we're representing these differences and acknowledge differences, and thinking about how the cultural environment or the knowledge and understanding of the world area really supports and exposes children to differences, even if our classrooms are completely white. And I think that that's another thing, thinking about the importance of talking about culture and normalizing culture. If you are only talking about the white people within your class and not talking about the differences, not talking about the gender or sex differences, you're perpetuating that is what the culture is like. Children who come into our settings, it's that first social interaction, it's that sensitive period for socialization. And so they're learning the cultural norms, they're learning what society is like, and it creates a big responsibility for us as Montessori educators. It takes a lot of, Montessori talks about the spiritual preparation of the teacher. I think it requires us all to be aware that we all have biases and we all have privilege, right? As Ruth said, I'm very aware that my white privilege has given me a different experience from Ruth and Stella. And I need to be aware of that bias because we all have it. Unconsciously, we have bias. And address that bias. And addressing privilege is an uncomfortable thing. And we have to sit with that uncomfortableness sometimes. We have to recognize that it's hard to realize that we haven't had that experience. We might have made a mistake with a certain child. We need to think about that, recognize our privilege, and what are we going to do? How are we going to use our privilege to benefit others, to really raise other people up, and to really create that voice, allow other voices to be heard. I think it's important as practitioners that we respond with curiosity. Again, we don't, like Stella said, we don't ignore, say race doesn't exist at all. We have to respond with curiosity. We have to ask about these experiences. We have to be curious about what the children are saying and the children are, how they're interacting with these subjects, what they're talking about. How are we going to create that curiosity to encourage our children to be critical thinkers, to be problem solvers, and to take action? We need to role model the action that we wish the children to take. And I would like to recommend, there's a Montessorian out there named Britt Hawthorne, and she's an African-American Montessorian, and she's been doing a lot of work on anti-bias education. And listening to one of her webinars this morning, I saw this quote and I thought it really resonated with us today. Differences do not create bias. Children learn prejudice from prejudice, not from learning about human diversity. It is how people respond to difference that teaches bias and fear. So we really need to recognize that our own biases and our own fear of acknowledging the difference experience, acknowledging that life is not equal, that we do not have the equal opportunities, that creates that prejudice and reinforces that bias. And we really need to think about how our bias and our fear of talking about subjects like this, like race, might be transferred onto children. And I thank you for letting me share, and I thank you for having the opportunity to listen to you all as well.
Thank you very much, Hannah. I've been very aware of the fact that even our awkwardness in responding to children when they ask difficult questions is sensed by the children. And therefore they already know this is something that is awkward or difficult, or this is not to be mentioned, depending on which side of the divide you are. And so our teachers, that idea of the spiritual preparation of the teacher, of the reflection, of the observation that we make of children, and responding as honestly and authentically as we possibly can, is really the kernel of the social justice that we are allowing to grow into something bigger as we support children in the earliest environments. Because remember, everything is being absorbed by the child, and often the unspoken becomes more powerful because it is unspoken. I know, Stella, when we talked in preparation for the webinar, that you have mentioned a really interesting personal experience with a 2-year-old, and I wondered if you would be happy to share that, because I think it's a very powerful message for all of us.
Of course, of course. A friend of mine told me a story of her son. Her son at the time was 2, and another child was staying over, and this child was an Asian child that was staying over. My friend is white, and the 2 children were in the bath, and this little boy just called him out why the Asian girl wasn't getting clean. He just couldn't work it out, and I guess that linked children's curiosity. And my friend spoke to him about difference. They mixed paints, they did all sorts of things for them to understand the differences between John and this little girl. And she makes the point of saying that it wasn't just one time she did this throughout John's life. Anyway, to cut a long story short, when John was about 6, another little boy came up to him and said, I've got a really good joke I have, but it's a racist one. So John just looked at him and said, then don't tell it. And my point is this, because it started, because his mother intervened, because his mother supported him and nourished him and gave him the information he needed as a 2-year-old, 3, 4, 5, 6, by the time he got to 6, he could say no quite clearly to racism. And I know talking about race is uncomfortable. I think once we break down the barrier of the language of the things or the words that we feel might offend people, we can start some really important conversations. And like my friend, we all have a responsibility to ensure that our children are connected, they feel a sense of belonging. But she is clear. It wasn't that one episode that just happened when John was 2 with this girl in the bath. It was something that was embedded throughout their family time at home. And that included the resources, the museums, the people they saw, etc.
And it of course relates to our attitudes to all people and respect that we have for each individual person and for their existence, irrespective of their background, irrespective of their race, irrespective of their gender. It is just encouraging the children to see each person as a human being. This is something that Montessori encourages us to see in children, and we should foster that when working with young children today and for the future. I don't imagine for 1 minute that this is going to be an easy journey. I don't imagine for 1 minute that we will always get the answers right. I would imagine that there will be moments when we, on reflection, we will feel ashamed of our response, because we are human beings too. But I think it is important that we continue on the quest of trying to get it right, of trying to be honest, trying to be accepting, because after all, we are one community, and the pandemic has made it very obvious that in fact, we have come to rely on the weakest, the most powerless members of our society. It is the people who earn the less who have ensured that actually we keep going. And this is a fantastic opportunity in the history of the world to accept everybody for what they do to the community for the best. I have been really touched in the place where I live, that on Thursday mornings when the rubbish people come to collect, I have noticed that people would leave messages to say thank you for keeping us going. This is for the first time in my whole life that I have seen such public acceptance of the people who take our rubbish away. But what would we do today in 3 months if they decided to go on strike? And I think that we need to value the contribution each person makes to the society. because without that contribution, we wouldn't exist as a whole. In a recent talk by Philip Gang, he talked about the importance of giving our passion to what we do, because it is through the passion towards the work that we do, we will be able to come to fulfill our cosmic task if we are talking in Montessori context, in context of Montessori education. And it is our opportunity to contribute to the whole citizenship of the world. Wendelin, I see that Suzanne had made a comment. Would you like to unmute yourself and tell us?
Hang on,
things?
I think I need to do that for her.
Okay.
I need to ask her. So let me go to.
I can see her on the screen. She's kind of moving. Oh, here she is. Good, done.
Thanks. I was just thinking, hi Stella, nice to see you.
Oh, lovely to see you.
And Ruth, thank you for that. I was also just thinking, you know, I grew up in Seychelles. So, you know, Stella, you were talking about we need to see color. However, in the environment, maybe similar to what Ruth was saying, we all lived the same, we all did the same, we went to the same schools, we did everything. So we did not see color. I saw color for the first time when I came to South Africa, or I was made aware of color. So a similar experience to Ruth, although I'm clearly very white. But what I was thinking, and possibly that's why Montessori's philosophy really resonated with me in terms of seeing the human in each person. And the experiences that I've had, you know, in my teaching years was also just seeing how the children end up bringing the parents together. And that's why I think, you know, sometimes we need to also, yes, we can do the work with the children in the school, and we can make sure our continent boxes have got all the right, you know, sort of diverse content, but we do actually need to bring the parents into the discussions as well and have those uncomfortable discussions with the parents. We had one instance in our school which wasn't necessarily race related, it was more religion related, where I had a very Hindu little girl and family and a very ultra Christian little girl and family, one obviously being brown, one being white. Well, not obvious, but and these two little girls found each other and just loved each other and wanted to do everything together. And the parents were beside themselves because, you know, when the little girl went to go and play in the Hindu household, she'd come home with a little bindi and a plate of whatever. And of course, you know, when the little Hindu girl went to the little Christian girl's house, she'd come back with Jesus on a cross. So the families were in a little bit of turmoil. But through the children and through the parents kind of seeing, and we had lots of discussions within the school as well, the two families actually ended up being really good friends and supporting each other. And when they left the school, the one thing that they said that they had valued the most was to open their eyes to other people and just realize that irrespective of the differences, we are all just people. So yeah, that was the reason for the comment, to say, you know what, we need to, yes, deal with the children, but we really need to have those discussions with the parents as well.
I see that we have got one young person on the screen with us, Kaylee's little son, Jackson. And I wonder, hi Jackson, I wonder if he has any views on the discussion. How do you feel about these grown-ups talking about all these things? What do you think?
I don't know. Do you think?
Do you want to say anything about how you found it when we went to the protest? No? You don't want to say anything? Okay. He's on the spot. Can I tell them what the funny thing that you said when we went to the protest in Henley? Can I? No. Okay.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you very much. I wonder if you would like to add anything to our discussion, Stella.
I think in relation to parents, I feel very strongly about how we support parents. I absolutely 150% believe we have a pedagogical responsibility to share knowledge of not just how children learn with parents, but I really do think we have a pedagogical responsibility. But I think in relation to parents and the example that Susanna gave, I think what becomes important is our policies. If we've got children that are being disrespectful because of religion, race, gender, we need to have policies in place that can help support us to do the right thing. You know, quite often people say they've got these policies, and actually the policy isn't worth the paper it's written on, because the policy and the practice doesn't somehow marry up. We need to find ways that, you know, if children are racist, or if they're sexist, or they say something about disability, that we take that seriously and we commit to working with parents, sharing knowledge of self, others, and community, and similarity and difference with our parents. We're in a unique place where we have lots of different parents with lots of different, you know, they're from different places, they're brilliant in different things, and we can really find ways to help pull that together, I think. It's not just about working with the child. You know, when I was writing the article for Nursery World, I give an example of a little boy who comes into school and tells the teacher that he had spent the weekend with his granddad, and that his granddad told him that he read in books that in Africa they cooked people in pots and that they were savages. Now, for me, we have a responsibility. Had I been that teacher, there would have been particular actions that I would have taken. And part of that would have meant helping the granddad to relearn some things in the nicest possible way. And I think, you know, we mustn't forget there is a lot of history that has been, the narrative is not necessarily reflective of the fact. And the chances are he did read that in a book, but we're educators. And I think we have a huge, huge role. And, you know, I will say again, we're trained to do the job that we do. Parents just have sex, or if they don't have sex, they've adopted, they might have IVF, but generally they've just had sex. And then we expect them to know exactly and precisely what to do with their children. We have a huge role to play in how we support them and how we have those difficult conversations, because a person's sense of belonging is so important. It affects self-esteem, it affects self-respect, it affects dignity. And I think all of those things, when they're nourished, we see beautiful children. When they're not nourished, we don't like what we see.
I think that to fulfill this responsibility, we also need to be not only supported by policies, but to also be supported by colleagues who are open to be challenged or open to challenging others, and who find ways of how to tease out the differences and the challenges in a respectful but strong way, so that people are not left thinking, well, I'm not quite sure what is meant here. You know, for years we have had all these policies which don't really live up to the daily life of the classrooms. I think that there are opportunities for us to rethink, even just relook at our bookshelves. We have all included books which have got children from different cultures, but do they really celebrate the culture of the children that are portrayed? Or are they just children included into the white cultures because that's where it feels comfortable? I mean, there are questions in every aspect of our life in our classrooms that we can explore and think about it. Ruth, would you like to add something?
Yes, I really think, parents need to come at the center of this process. And I was thinking about the absorbent mind right now when this was being said, in terms of, the child between, so this is according to Montessori, and I'm sure other theories support it as well, between 0 and 6, the mind of the child is very absorbent. And normally, so especially in the unconscious absorbent mind, which is at the earliest stage, you can't differentiate whether what to absorb or not. You're basically absorbing your environment, and you're not going to say, I'm just going to absorb what's happening in my nursery, but not at home. So basically you can see it is very interrelated. As much as they are absorbing what we are doing in the nursery, they're going to absorb what's happening at home as well. So unless we bring the family and the parents at the center of this, then unless they are on board, unless they are hands-on in this, then we really can't, make the difference that we want to make. First of all, we need to agree on, like, it shouldn't be the home environment is this, like we have these values and these principles, which is entirely different to what the values and principles of nursery is. So there needs to be an agreement, and on, like, the child needs to be in this environment where things are kind of interrelated and supporting each other. And I was thinking, so parents, as practitioners as well as, but mainly parents, the child that you're raising now, so in terms of the absorbed mind we were talking about, when they grow up, so we could be raising a child who is going to be a prime minister. We can be raising a child who is going to be, in a place where they're going to shape the policies of a government or something. So not only that, like, I'm not saying they're more important because they're going to be a prime minister, but the policy they're going to shape is going to affect an entire nation. It's going to affect literally everyone in that era. So basically, we contribute to the prime minister who is going, like, to his mindset or her mindset, which is going to shape a nation later on. So what kind of shaping do you want to do right now at this stage during the absorbent mind? And of course, we all need to be on board, because we can't do something in the nursery which is going to be undone when they go back home.
And of course, whatever happens, if we are contributing towards the education of the future prime minister or the future teacher, all those values that we share with them are very important, are fundamental to their well-being, and we have the opportunity to influence the future generations. And for that, we have to continue to fight and be committed to trying to tease out the important things and to challenge, not to be afraid of challenging, questioning, reflecting on what we do. Hana, would you like to add something?
Yes, I mean, I think to add to that is we're on this continuous journey and we're constantly learning, and we as educators need to spend the time to learn, to do the work, especially we as white educators need to consider other people's experiences and think about how we can create that inclusive environment, right? Montessori talked about that spiritual preparation to take care and create that inclusive environment where all children are represented and all children have a sense of identity and belonging, and they feel a part of that Casa dei Bambini. It's the house for those children. And I do believe children age, and Montessori talked about, through children will come peace. And so, like Ruth said, you never know what children we're raising in our classroom, right? And it's a huge responsibility, and it's a responsibility we need to take seriously. And I think now, especially, racism and everything's been going on for a long time. Systemic racism is very alive in Europe and in the UK, and is not just an American problem. It is here, and we need to do the work and we need to make the change. And I think that it coming to the forefront now, especially during the time of the pandemic and everything being so raw and and ready, it's our job to really work and to create that inclusivity and listen and take the time to listen. So thank you.
Thank you everybody for your contributions. Thank you everybody for participating in the webinar, the first one for Montessori Europe. I hope it will help you to think a little bit more about your role, about the opportunities you have in influencing children, about challenging practice, challenging your colleagues and challenging yourselves as we go forward. I would like to also invite you to the next webinar, which will be held on the 4th of August, where we will be discussing the principles of the Montessori and the values of the Montessori approach. And I will be joined by Judith Cunningham, one of the board members of Montessori Europe. If you would like to benefit from the webinars for the future, we would very much encourage you to join Montessori Europe, to become members, to get free access to what we are doing. And I look forward to seeing you on the 4th of August. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.